All right, hey everyone, listen up. If you're getting ready for those UPSC exams, especially mains and prelims, staying up to date on current events is like super important. And we are diving deep into a recent Supreme Court judgment that's all over the news and like definitely can show up on your exam.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. This is a big one. The Supreme Court just made this major ruling about how states should be handling the release of prisoners, before they've served their full sentences.
So we're talking like remission here.
Exactly, remission. And this decision from the court has like huge implications for the whole justice system in India.
I know remission can sound a bit like legal jargon. So for those of us who need a little refresher, can you break it down like what does it actually mean in the Indian legal context?
Sure, so remission basically means reducing a prison sentence. It's been a part of Indian law for quite a while. Both the old Code of Criminal Procedure, from 1973, the CRPC, and the brand new Bharatiya Nyaya Suraksha Sanhita, the BNSS, which is like a whole new set of criminal laws they introduced. Just this year, they both give state governments the power to reduce sentences.
Okay.
And here's the thing, they can do this at any time during a prisoner's sentence.
At any time. So that sounds like states have a lot of flexibility,
Yeah.
but there must be some limits, right?
Oh, you're definitely right. There are limitations for sure. Like convicts who are serving life sentences or if they're facing the death penalty, they have to serve at least 14 years before they can even be considered for release. And then even when remission is granted, states can set specific conditions that the released prisoner has to follow.
Okay.
And if those conditions are broken, it's right back to prison.
Okay, so there's a framework. It's not just like a free pass.
Exactly.
But here's what really caught my eye, and I'm sure you noticed it too, especially for our UPSC prelims folks out there. The Supreme Court changed how this whole remission process works. It's not just about prisoners applying anymore, right?
That's the big change. Before, prisoners had to actively apply for remission.
Right.
But now the Supreme Court has said that states have to consider remission proactively, even if the prisoner doesn't apply.
Wow, that's a pretty major shift.
Yeah.
What was the court's reasoning behind like mandating this proactive approach?
Well, they argued that many states already have these established remission policies with clear criteria for who's eligible. So requiring prisoners to apply on top of that just creates a ton of unnecessary bureaucracy and hurdles for people who might actually qualify.
So it's almost like an extra layer of red tape
Exactly.
that could prevent people who deserve it from actually benefiting.
Exactly. And the court basically said that not considering eligible prisoners for remission simply because they haven't applied would be discriminatory and arbitrary and a direct violation of the right to equality, which is enshrined in our Constitution.
That's a really powerful statement. It's not just about the legal technicalities. It's about upholding fundamental rights.
Absolutely. And they didn't stop there. They gave all the states a deadline 2 months to either set up these comprehensive remission policies if they don't have them, or revise the ones they've got to include this proactive approach.
Wow.
This is to make sure it's implemented consistently across the whole country.
Okay, so states have a clear mandate and a ticking clock. But what about guidance? Did the Supreme Court give any specifics on what these policies should actually look like? What factors do they need to consider?
Yeah, for sure. They provided a framework for these policies. They emphasized that states can't just use a one-size-fits-all approach. They have to look at the specifics of each case.
Okay.
Things like the motive behind the crime, the person's criminal history, any public safety concerns, all of that needs to be carefully considered.
So it's not as easy as just saying, okay, you served your time, you're free. There's a lot to think about. And for those of you studying for the mains exam, understanding all these little details is super important. Like you could get a question asking you to analyze what this judgment really means, and you'll have to show you get all the complexities.
Yeah, you can't just memorize facts. You got to show you can think critically and analyze the situation.
Exactly. Going back to those factors the court mentioned, can you give us some examples like how they would actually play out in real life?
Sure. Let's say we're looking at the motive behind a crime. Was it a crime of passion, something done in a moment of intense emotion, or was it planned out carefully, premeditated?
Right.
That difference can make a big impact on whether someone gets remission or not.
Yeah, that makes sense. A crime of passion is different from a calculated plan, and the court wants states to consider all those details.
Exactly. And then you've got the person's criminal history. Is this their first offense, or do they have a long rap sheet? Obviously, that's important when you're trying to figure out how likely they are to commit another crime.
So it sounds like the court is trying to balance individual situations with keeping the public safe. It's not about just being lenient. It's about making smart decisions with all the information.
You're exactly right. The court has made it clear that remission shouldn't be a free pass out of jail. It's about giving people a real shot at turning their lives around, becoming productive members of society again.
Which, when you think about it, makes sense. If someone serves some of their sentence and they show they're sorry, and it seems like they're not going to commit another crime, why keep them locked up?
Exactly. And that's where these carefully crafted remission policies come in. They give states the tools to evaluate each person individually, taking all those factors we talked about into account.
Okay, so we've been focusing on the legal and procedural side of this judgment, which is super important for understanding its impact. But let's switch gears a bit and talk about what this means in the real world. One of the biggest problems in India is prison overcrowding. Could this judgment help with that?
That's a great question, and I bet it's on the minds of a lot of policymakers and definitely UPSC aspirants. Like, you're right. Indian prisons are way overcrowded. The latest stats show they're operating at a crazy 131.4% capacity. That's over 5,320 inmates jammed into spaces that were built for way fewer people.
Those are some scary numbers. So is this judgment going to magically fix overcrowding?
Well, it's not an instant solution. It's a big step. But remember, most of the people in prison haven't actually been convicted of anything.
Yeah.
Yet they're under trials, their cases are still going on, and they don't qualify for remission under these new rules.
Ah, I see. So it won't help everyone in prison, but it can make a real difference for the convict population.
Definitely. And we're already seeing how remission policies are becoming more common even before this judgment. The prison statistics in India report shows a huge increase in people being released early in 2022, over 5,000 prisoners compared to just over 2,000 in the 2 years before.
Wow, that's a big jump. It'll be interesting to see how those numbers change in the next few years, especially as these new policies roll out across all the states. But let's not forget, remission isn't just about letting people out. It's also about the rules they have to follow once they're released. What are some of the conditions states might set for prisoners who get remission?
That's a really important point. The court was very clear about this. Any conditions have to be reasonable things people can actually achieve. It's not about setting them up to fail. They have to be things someone can realistically manage so they can stay on the right side of the law.
So no checking in with the police every hour.
Exactly. The goal is to help them reintegrate, not make it harder. And the court also said if someone does break these rules, it has to be fair. Remission shouldn't be taken away for little slip-ups. There needs to be a real process with clear reasons and a chance for the person to explain themselves.
So that's how the new policy should work in theory. But we all know putting things into practice can be a whole other story.
Yeah.
What are some of the problems states might run into when they try to implement these new remission policies?
Now, that's where things get interesting and where you UPSC folks need those analytical skills. One of the biggest challenges is resources states are going to need money and people to actually make these policies work. They'll need to train staff, create systems to evaluate cases, and make sure everything is fair and transparent.
That's a lot to do, especially with that 2-month deadline. Makes you wonder if all states are ready for this.
Yeah, that's a good point. Not all states have the same resources and infrastructure. Some might be better prepared than others, and then there's public opinion.
Oh yeah, people are worried about safety, and there's bound to be some pushback against releasing people who committed crimes, even if they meet the requirements for remission.
Absolutely. This judgment is going to cause a lot of debate, and discussion states are going to have to find a way to balance what the court wants with keeping people safe and dealing with any fears about releasing people back into communities.
Sounds like a tricky balancing act. On one hand, you have the court upholding fundamental rights and promoting rehabilitation. On the other hand, you have to keep people safe and address public concerns.
Exactly. And that's what makes this judgment so fascinating. It could affect so many parts of Indian society, prison reform, rehabilitation programs, how we even understand justice and giving people second chances.
It's not just a legal matter, it's a societal.
Precisely. And for those of you going for those top scores on those UPSC exams, this judgment is like a perfect case study. You can analyze the legal reasoning, the potential impact on society, the problems with implementation. It's all there.
Okay, so we've talked about a lot the details of the judgment, what it could mean for prisons and society as a whole. But before we move on, let's think about something the court really emphasized, something that's key to understanding their thinking. They said remission shouldn't just be about reducing the number of people in prison or making things easier on the justice system.
Right. They want us to look at criminal justice in a more holistic way, a way that balances punishment with rehabilitation, individual circumstances with public safety.
So it's not just about shorter sentences, it's about giving people a real chance to change their lives and rejoin society.
Exactly. And that takes more than just opening prison doors. It means providing support and resources for those who are released, things like job training, counseling, help with finding housing, and healthcare.
Yeah, it feels like this judgment could really change how we think about criminal justice in India. Like, it's
Mhm.
not just about changing a few laws, it's about maybe changing how we view crime and punishment as a whole society.
I think you're right. It makes us ask some really basic questions about why we punish people, what's the point of rehabilitation, and what does justice really even mean?
And for all of you studying for the UPSC, this is exactly the kind of big picture thinking that can make you stand out. Don't just memorize the facts. Try to really understand what they mean. This judgment shows how the courts can change society, even in areas that might seem politically tricky.
Definitely for those exams, understanding how law, policy, and society all affect each other, that's super important. It's not enough to just know the law. You have to see how it works in real life, how it impacts people.
Okay, so to wrap up our deep dive into this Supreme Court decision on remission, let's go over the key points again, especially for our dedicated UPSC folks out there first. The big change states now have to consider releasing certain prisoners early, even if they don't ask for it.
Right. And remember, this is specifically for people who have already been convicted, not those who are still awaiting trial. And there are limits, especially for serious crimes, like those with life sentences or the death penalty.
Exactly. And even when someone is granted remission, there can be conditions, and those conditions have to be reasonable things people can actually do, according to the court's guidelines. The court is really pushing for a balanced approach, punishment, along with rehabilitation, individual circumstances, alongside public safety.
And that's where those state-specific policies are so important. They need to be comprehensive and consider things like what kind of crime was committed, the person's past history, and any potential risks. It's not about just letting everyone out of prison. It's about having a system that truly helps people rejoin society and makes it less likely they'll commit another crime.
So we've got the what and the how, but for our ambitious UPSC students, the why is just as important. This judgment goes beyond just the legal stuff. It shows a potential shift in our entire approach to criminal justice.
Exactly. We're talking about the role of punishment, the importance of rehabilitation, the very meaning of justice. It's deep stuff, but crucial for understanding the bigger picture.
Absolutely. And for those aiming for top marks on those exams, this judgment is full of things to discuss. You can analyze the legal reasoning, the potential impact on society, the challenges of putting it into practice. It's all right there.
It's a great chance to show off your critical thinking skills, which is what the UPSC is looking for.
So there you have it, a Supreme Court ruling that's creating waves and sparking conversations all over India. We've talked about the legal details, the potential impact on prisons, and the broader picture for society. But before we go, we want to leave you with a final question, to think about something, to really get those brain cells working with this move towards more proactive remission. What are the potential challenges and opportunities for India's criminal justice system? How do we balance individual needs with the safety and well-being of our communities? Share your thoughts in the comments below.
We'd love to hear your perspectives and get a discussion going about this complex and evolving issue.
And don't forget, everyone, this deep dive was inspired by the reporting in the Indian Express, so check them out for more details. And as always, please like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell for more deep dives into the topics that matter, especially for all you UPSC folks out there. We'll catch you on the next one.